cover this. Um, so it's just cities and globalization. Um, so the essential learning question here says explain how cities embody processes of globalization. I'm not sure if anybody is recently watching the news. When President of the United States, Donald Trump, he just imposed tariffs. What are tariffs? Okay. Well, tariffs are taxes on usually imports from other countries. So he just imposed high rate tariffs on many countries around the world. And so as a result, many countries might not be able to do business with the United States. So here it says cities embody the process of globalization. And globalization is this idea that we live in an interconnected world, right? And not all cities are equal. Not all cities are equal. You know, you could have a country with several large cities, but those cities can function for different reasons or can have different economies. So some cities could be reliant on, let's say, services economy, or could be on industrialization, you know, manufacturing, things like that. Okay. So it says here, world cities function at the top of world's urban hierarchy. Think hierarchical diffusion here and drive globalization. I'm just going to quickly read this. So large cities that exert global economic, cultural, political influence and make up network of economic, social, and information flows. So think about like the largest cities in the world, whether they're located in Europe, in Asia, or in North America, or even South America. So those cities, they lead, okay, cultural influences, political influences. Um, and so if you look at, you know, think about Beijing, China, or Shanghai, China. Think about London, New York, Sao Paulo, Brazil. Um, those cities, they kind of influence culture. Think about Milan, even, you know, influencing perhaps the fashion industry or Paris. So all those large cities, they do have some kind of influence, whether it be economic or cultural, that kind of flows into the rest of the country or the world. So it says globalizing cities at the top of the world's urban hierarchy are all connected. So think about fashion houses around the world. So like again, Milan, Paris, New York, those tend to be the popular ones. Well, what do they all have in common? Well, they have all things like haute couture, or you know, they have you know, fashion brands that are very popular that like to have their fashion shows there. It says here media hubs and financial centers with influential stock exchanges. So I believe like the biggest stock exchange in Asia, if I'm not mistaken, is the Hong Kong Stock Exchange. The most or the biggest one in Europe is the London Stock Exchange, and the biggest stock exchange by capitalization is the New York Stock Exchange. It's the most liquid stock exchange in the world. So that's where, you know, the most money flows every day. I think it's more than like 100 billion, if I'm not mistaken. Um,
يعني capital
Capital in this
most
case,
capital.
yeah. So in this case, like money. So essentially, you know, when we're talking about like capital, we're not just talking about like the capital of a country. We're talking about like capital as in like, you know, there's a lot of money. Um, so that's what we mean. So again, you see here fashion, design, entertainment, cultural industries. The larger cities are the hubs for those activities. Again, whether they're cultural, economic, or political, you'll have these city hubs for the world, and they're all interconnected in some way or another. As you can see here, it says the graph ranks the top world cities as measured by the Global Power City Index. This is not necessarily, or these cities are not necessarily ranked based on their populations. Okay, they're not ranked based on their population because London is not really, it's one of the biggest cities in the world in terms of population, but it's not the biggest. But as you can see here, it says evaluate cities according to their power to attract people, capital, in this case, money, businesses from around the world. And it says, notice that six functions used to calculate GPCI, including city's economy, culture, and livability. So, according to this particular index, the best city in the world to live in, according to this particular measurement, is London, right? It's livable, it has culture, it has a large economy, and it has a lot of businesses operating there, lots of money, lots of opportunities, and lots of tourists too. So it kind of ranks top of the list. And then you have New York, and you can see Tokyo, Paris. Of course, these cities, they could be strong in one thing or in another, but generally speaking, because they're being measured in all six categories, they have to have some kind of strength in all of those six categories. Um, but as you can see, we have one, two, three, four, five. So half of the cities around the world that are most livable and that are powerful global cities are in Asia, particularly East Asia, right? And then you have one, two, three, four are located in Europe. So if
That's
there's
شنو R&D.
research and development, that's a good question. So R&D is research and development. It's essentially how much do they spend, okay, on research and development? How much are they developing new drugs, new medicines? Are they being innovative, or are they just sitting on their tradition? So you can see a trend here, or essentially it's really a pattern, is that the most livable and powerful cities around the world are located mostly in Europe and in East Asia. And so you can see that those are the largest cities. So if you're a bank and you want to go into the global market of banking, it would be great to open shop somewhere in, Santiago, Chile, but it would be more it would make much more like sense to open maybe in Hong Kong or in Tokyo or in Singapore. It might not even make sense to open in a city like um, say Houston, Texas, or Los Angeles even, because they're not on the list, although they are powerful cities as well. Just keep this in mind. So Global Power City Index, it kind of evaluates those cities based on the categories. Of course, environment here means, okay, is there a lot of air pollution? Is it cleaner environment? Do these cities have um, laws against pollution? So think about, like, Paris is one of those cities that does have regulations against essentially, cars with certain, gas emissions. So, do they have those laws in place? A few years ago, this is not related to environment, but I believe a few years ago, New York City, or the mayor of New York City, I think it was at that time Michael Bloomberg, um, he tried to get, and this is real, get like a maximum limit on how much um, basically like restaurants can serve, soda. Like I think it was 20-ounce um, like cans or something that they can serve, or cups. And then people went crazy and they were like, who are you to tell us like how much soda we can drink? So governments always try to find like a balancing way between what they think is good for their citizens of those cities and what essentially is tolerable. Um, as you can see here, it says connections between world cities. So this particular map that you're all looking at right here, it says top 10 busiest airports in the world. This is where you see that the major cities we've spoken about in the previous slide, East Asia, Europe, they still kind of dominate, at least regionally speaking, the busiest airports. So, and this makes kind of, lots of sense that, you have cities like Shanghai will have, likely to have one of the busiest airports in the world. Same thing with Tokyo, Japan. The anomaly here is that we don't really see New York as having one of the busiest airports in the world. And then we have Dubai as one of the busiest airports in the world, although it's not a mega city in the sense that we compare it to the ones that were on the previous list. So these are, outliers. You can see, you still have London and Paris having some of the busiest airports in the world, and also some of the most powerful cities in the world. So you can see diffusion of new ideas, good services. Well, the world is interconnected. People who want to, wealthy people from, say, East Asia, say Beijing, China, or even Shanghai, well, they want to spend their money maybe in Dubai, or they want to spend their money in London, or perhaps, they want a vacation in Los Angeles. And so, that the capital, essentially the money flows. There's a lot of movement of people, lots of movements of goods and services around the world. And so those cities serve as, connecting points for all of the essentially economic and cultural or even political activities that are going on. Okay. Um, so essentially, this is how, globally, world cities, large world cities, they connect the world. Okay. So you can see from here, according to the GPCI, most of the most livable and most powerful cities, really, around the world are located in Europe and particularly East Asia. And here, also, some of the largest airports in the world, or busiest rather, airports in the world, are also located in East Asia as well as Europe. Again, you have like cities like Dubai. They are one of the busiest. It says it's number four. That's because they intentionally worked on this. And I think, this is 2019. Yes. So this could have changed. Doha Airport is probably one of the busiest as well. And, so there could be some change in the data, but I would still assume that, those airports are still very, very busy. Okay. Any questions? Any questions? All right, we're gonna go ahead and move on to 6.4 since we're doing really good on time. So size and distribution of the cities. So when I started kind of this session, I did say that not all cities are equal, right? So you can have a country that has several large cities, but some of those cities are more economically vibrant than others. Some of those cities are more culturally vibrant than others. And one of the countries I'd like to personally look at is Germany. So Germany's capital, which is Berlin, it's a vibrant city. Okay. Culturally speaking, it's very nice for artists and musicians to go there and get something going. However, from an economic point of view, and of course, it's the political center of Germany, obviously, but from an economic point of view, you still have West Germany as the leader, really, of manufacturing, and it contributes a lot. Like cities like Frankfurt, Munich, Dusseldorf, those cities they still contribute heavily to the economy of Germany, usually more than the capital, which is Berlin. But Berlin still nonetheless a very important city. But again, the size and distribution of the cities plays a key role in how things play out. So here's the objective. It says identify the different urban concepts, such as the hierarchy, interdependence, relative size, and spacing that are useful for explaining the distribution, size, and interaction of cities. Now, you'll have some cities that have been there for thousands of years. Think like Cairo, Egypt. Think Beijing. Think London. Those cities, they've been there, and they will likely stay there as important centers for their countries, not necessarily maybe the world, but for at least their countries. But then we've also had in the last 200, 300 years, new cities that were founded. Think like mostly North America and South America. And those cities, some of them, they've grown so big that they've actually connected with other cities. So think about like Dallas, Fort Worth, Texas city. So those two cities, they were separate and then they kept growing, growing, growing. And then they start to connect, into kind of like just this one metropolitan area. Um, and you guys have to just excuse me for a second. Okay. I'm just going to pause here. All right. Resuming. So you'll have again cities that end up so large that they connect with other cities. Okay. We'll talk about Crystal's central place theory. Okay. And then primate cities. So here's the urban hierarchy. It says modern cities operate within an interconnected urban hierarchy. So you have the global cities. These are the very big ones. They're interconnected. And then you have larger cities. Those are kind of like essentially, the regional cities. They serve sometimes as provincial capitals. And then you have just the normal or regular sized cities. And then of course you have towns, villages, and a hamlet is just really a group of people. You're talking like usually 50 people, perhaps 100 people, but hamlets are very, very small. Okay. Um, Excuse me 1 second, guys. All right. So, and of course, you have like, essentially the different populations that live in these different regional centers, or urban centers or rural. So you're not going to have 1 million people live in a village. And then you're not going to have just 1,000 people live in a city. Although, around the I want to say 1770s, 1780s, the population of New York City was about 2,000 people. So you can see, just in the last 250 some years, New York City went from a city of 2,000 people to a city of more than, I think 6 or 7 or 8 million people, depending on if we're counting the city itself or its metropolitan area as well. So there is usually growth that happens that lead to these cities becoming essentially global cities. Okay. Um, so as you can see, the larger the city is, the more people live in it. The smaller the settlement is, the less people live in it. This is just pretty logical here. It says models or theories were developed by geographers in order to explain the relative sizes and spatial organization of cities. So, some cities they are near bodies of water. Some cities happen to be just in the middle of, like nowhere. But there is usually a reason why, cities develop where they develop. So the first thing we need to know about, this is really important. It's called the rank size rule. Okay, the rank size rule. This is very straightforward. Okay, it says model that illustrates the relationship between population distribution in cities that are interconnected in the urban hierarchy. So it says typically indicates somewhat even development. Okay, so essentially we just take the city with the highest number of population. Okay, and then we say this is the largest city, and that's really it. Okay, so the largest city in the United Kingdom is London, right? So I'm not going to get into the particular details of the population, because I'm not 100% sure what the population of London is, if it's 12 million or 13 million, but it is definitely the largest city. Okay. So here it says the population of the second largest city, okay, one half the population of the largest city. This is the rank size rule. So um, remember, this is essentially kind of, you know, it's about like the distribution and sizes of the cities. So what that tells you is that, you know, just like, Malthusian theory and just like the bid rent theory and all the other theories we've kind of mentioned in previous lessons, it's still a theory. So it's not like perfect, like, right? It's not going to be 100% just like what the theory is going to say. Are you going to have a country with a population of exactly like, or a city, sorry, with a population of 1 million people, not more, not less? That's going to be pretty difficult. But even then, when you have a second largest city, okay, are you going to have exactly half of the largest city? I would say that's also, not always accurate. Okay, just keep in mind, this is the rank size rule. This is what geographers have said, could happen when it comes to like distribution of cities. Okay, so you would want your largest city to have the 1 million people. You would want your largest city to have half of, your 1 million people, and then you would want your third largest city to have a third of the 1 million, and then your fourth largest city, you would want it to have a quarter, okay, of the largest city. But that doesn't always really happen, right? I mean, if we took the three largest cities in the United States, New York, Chicago, Los Angeles, okay, and we're talking about their metropolitan areas, uh, you know, I believe New York is about 12 million, Chicago somewhere 10 million, maybe. It's so Chicago's population is definitely not half of New York's population, and Los Angeles's population is definitely not a third of New York's population. So, the rank size rule doesn't really like work in a country like the United States. Um, all right. Then we have the primate city. Okay, primate cities, it says model that illustrates disproportionate population distribution within a state or a region or a province. So in this case, you can see in northern France, you have Paris with a population of 9.6 million. And then you have Marseille, which is, I want to say, kind of like southern France. Correct me if I'm wrong. 1.3 million. So it says here one particular city is extremely large in terms of population size and economic. This is mostly in Europe, where the city is kind of like the place to go to. So essentially, it's a hub for that region, and possibly even for the country. Um, so this tends to happen in unitary systems. If you remember, we talked about unitary systems and federal systems. You're likely to see this in unitary systems, um, but not necessarily 100% again, but you are likely to see this in unitary systems. So primate cities, they're standalone cities, very large, and then the region around it is like, mostly empty. Um, so it says one particular city extremely large, and then economically it's very important for the country or the region. And it says typically indicates relatively uneven development within a state or within a region. Okay. So in the example of Mexico City, it has about 21 million, 22 million people. And then really around Mexico City is just, small rural areas, but they're not really a big contributing factor to the city itself. Same thing, Guadalajara, which is in northern Mexico, has about 5 million people, and then around it is just essentially insignificant areas of populations. The gravity model. Let me just check how much time we have on Zoom. Okay, we got 6 minutes. Good. So the gravity model here, it says illustrates the spatial relationship amount of interaction between locations of different sizes, flows of people, trade, traffic, communication, etc. And it says considers the distance between two locations, their relative sizes. So take a look at these three images right here. You got New York City, Indianapolis, Cincinnati. It says illustrates the spatial relationship of interaction between locations of different sizes, flows of people, trade, communication. So, economically speaking, out of those three, which one do you think is the most powerful, at least country wise? So, that would
New
be
York.
New York. Very good. So, New York City would be the most economically powerful. We've mentioned it's one of the largest cities in the world. And so, uh, New York doing trade with Indianapolis or even Cincinnati, it would likely probably be more affecting those two cities than those two cities affecting it back. However, those two cities could be exporting things, to New York, could be like manufacturing products, and then those two cities, their relationships with each other, they're both in the kind of like Midwest, and so their economies maybe have things in common than what they have in common with New York City. So it says here consider the distance between two locations and their relative sizes. So although New York City is much, much larger than Indianapolis, but Indianapolis as a city that is kind of like important in Ohio, well, sorry, in Indianapolis, of course. It's an important city in Indiana, okay? So essentially, it serves as a major hub for that state. Same thing with Cincinnati, Ohio, serves as a major hub for that state. Relatively speaking, when we talk about Cincinnati compared to New York is more important in terms of economic activities or more powerful. But relatively speaking to the rest of Ohio, Cincinnati is very, very important. Okay. So it says here larger cities interact more often with other larger cities than smaller cities. So think about, again, perhaps there's more economic activity, more trade happening um, between or amongst those cities. It says here small cities are drawn to the influence and impact of large cities. So you're still, if you're a smaller city, let's say around NYC, you're still doing trade with it, you're still interacting with it, but not as much perhaps as the other larger and regional cities. And so the gravity model is that everyone wants to be near the large cities, okay? And that's because maybe they are the political hub, maybe they are the economic hub of the region or the country. And so they draw more people into their vicinity.
لا ما فهمت. ما فهمت المين بوينت.
Okay, so the main point here, Faisal, is that essentially those larger cities, they think about like the gravity of the sun, right? How it pulls the earth. The earth makes a revolution around the sun, right, once a year, and then the planets also make revolutions around the sun. So think about the sun as like being the major city, and then the planets being like the smaller cities around it. So they're still functioning somewhat independently, but they're still tied to the main, hub, to the main city, right? Which is in this case could be New York City. So the areas around it, the small cities, are still interacting with it. They're still, maybe people who are living in Connecticut or New Jersey, maybe they're going to work in New York City. Maybe that's because there's more jobs in New York City. So people in those areas around it, they go to work there. And because that's the gravity model, right? Same thing with Cincinnati, Ohio. You know, maybe there are sports teams in Cincinnati, Ohio, and then there are like say basketball games or football games in Cincinnati, Ohio. And then if you're in a small city in Ohio, you travel to Cincinnati to watch the games because the games are not going to be hosted in like a small village in Ohio. Does that make sense? So these are gravity model cities where they pull the regions around them into them because they have something that perhaps the region doesn't have. Okay, I want to cover Crystal's model or place theory just quickly before the session ends in about a minute. Okay. Um, So this particular one, you have the city, and then you have kind of like market towns around the city, and then you have like kind of like independent towns, okay, around essentially the market towns. So the city is not as important, okay, to the economy because remember the market towns are kind of linking the cities and the towns, okay? And then also you have villages around the city. So it's like it's an interconnected system here. It's a hexagon, okay, that kind of essentially assures that there's economic activity that reaches everyone, whether you're a small town or a large city, okay, because economic activities are happening in all surrounding areas.